Hi, I'm Donna Ray.
And I'm Al Wadley.
Welcome to our podcast, Feldenkrais for Life.
In each episode, we will discuss ideas and experiences pertaining to the Feldenkrais method.
You're going to learn skills that will move pain to comfort, anxiety to ease, and we'll explore learning and how to spark creativity.
To learn more about Donna, visit her site at donnaray.com.
To find Al Wadley, go to achievingexcellence.com.
Hey, Donna.
Hi, Al. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How are you today?
I'm very well, and I'm looking forward to this discussion as always. It's a fine time to talk about the Feldenkrais method and know that our listeners are enjoying our discussions, and we're receiving more and more emails, feedback, notes from people saying how useful it is to them, and that warms my heart.
It does mine too. I really am so grateful that our words are getting out there. People are listening and being inspired to explore the Feldenkrais method and to learn about themselves through the Feldenkrais method.
So today, what are we going to talk about?
Well, we're going to talk about cross-motivation, which is a really cool topic that Dr. Feldenkrais discussed in a number of his books and in his trainings. And it is this concept that people may try to enact more than one motivation at the same time that are not congruent with each other. And so not acting with a monomotivation, that is a singular intention and action, and they're trying to enact more than one or more motivations, two or more motivations at the same time, which creates conflict and confusion in the movement and limits their ability to do what they want to do in life.
So this cross-motivation of trying to do at least two things at once, or maybe many more, creates conflict, and the intention and the action don't line up because the intention is not singular. It's multifaceted. So let's see if we can become a little bit more concrete with that. So I have known many, many people over the years, and in my mentoring and coaching with people, I come across this. People that want to set up a business in Feldenkrais method or in psychotherapy or coaching, where they need to build up a clientele. And there are many steps that have to be taken to create that kind of business. Talking to people, individuals, groups of people, learning how to speak, learning how to be self-promoting, figuring out what your brand is, as they say these days. And those folks are so frustrated because they want a business. And then when we break it down and look at the steps that they're taking, they're not taking the steps that would lead them to a successful business practice. And for some reason, usually an unconscious, they're incapable of setting up their own business, and they often go back to work for somebody else.
Let's break that down a little bit. What would be an example or some examples of these people you've worked with that they're trying to set up the motivation, yet something is inhibiting them or stopping them, some kind of internal feeling? What is it? Self-doubt, insecurity? How would you describe that in the people you've worked with that stops them from being able to take the steps forward to get their business going?
Well, when I get to know them, there are many, many reasons, and you've mentioned a few. It can be self-doubt. It can be fear of responsibility. When you're in your own business like that, people say the buck stops here. It's like it's up to you to make your living. Self-reliance, self-trust. It can be a lack of information, not knowing how to correspond with people, not knowing how to keep an appointment book properly. There's so many different things that you have to actually know to create a business like that. So sometimes it's lack of information, but all these other reasons come up too. When we simply look at the Feldenkrais method, because we always go to how people are moving, what actions are being taken. So if you're reaching forward, but you're pulling back at the same time, you're not going to be able to grab the pencil. You're not going to be able to get that jar of almond butter out of the cupboard, because you're going forward and back at the same time. And you feel that conflict and the tension of trying to reach and not going forward. You're pulling your torso back and your arms going forward. That is so frustrating. You can all listeners, you can imagine doing that. And we have all had the experience. So there's somewhere in us where we've had that experience. So when I'm coaching and using the Feldenkrais method and also business acumen, the whole thing, you have to look at every aspect of the human behavior, that particular human's behavior, because we're all unique. We really are. We do it differently. Then the person becomes aware of what they're doing, what they're not doing, what their intentions and their actions are reflecting to them. And in some cases, people decide not to have their own business. It's not for them. And others sort out these components and they become successful.
And I think it's a really great example of cross-motivation that stops somebody from doing something they want to do. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, like you say, they can work through it and they can be doing what they want to do. Sometimes they find out that, no, it's not what they wanted to do. An idea that they had or they thought they should do. Maybe,
mm-hmm.
They went to their training or they got their degree and, well, you should have a practice now. You should be going out there and doing this. And this kind mm-hmm. of should imposes like a rule or some, state that says, you have to do this. Mm-hmm. Yet it may not be really in line and congruent with what they want to do. So they find that out, that it's not congruent. Mm-hmm. And there's another aspect of cross-motivation where people, they have internal drive to achieve or approve themselves, to accomplish, and it's a powerful drive. And yet there's also this internal reluctance, hesitance, self-doubt, and yet they push through. So they're pushing hard to get what they want, and they are often extremely successful. They get what they want. They build a business and they're successful in life. They're living the dream, so to speak, except they still have this internal feeling that they have to keep working against and pushing through. Mm-hmm. This creates a lot of tension between mm-hmm. these two motivations that are not in line with each other in their body, in their movements become rigid, they become stiff, they have pain. And that's another way that cross-motivation shows up.
It reminds me of another client of mine who's a very high-level attorney. And during COVID, as with so many people, was in front of her computer day in and day out. And while working in front of the computer, she was becoming more and more tense, and she wasn't coming in for hands-on lessons. So we were working with awareness through movement on the screen. But her neck started hurting so badly, she could hardly stand or sit anymore. So I suggested that she take her meetings lying down as much as possible. So that was breaking up the pattern. We really had to get to the fear and anxiety that was going along with work that she wasn't experiencing before when she was going to the office, before the pandemic. So this contraction pattern throughout her whole self, that anxiety pattern that Dr. Feldenkrais talks about and relates to the fear of falling, it's a contraction of the whole front of the self. So you could tuck and roll if you were to fall down, because it preserves your organs. It keeps you safe. So you use your skeleton to roll around like a pill bug and you don't injure yourself. But if you're standing up and sitting up and you're contracting like that and you're inhibiting your breathing, what happens? Wow, your neck starts hurting, your back starts hurting. Things hurt everywhere. It shows up in different places for different people. But neck and low back are typical places because they need to be free and responsive. But you can't just snap your fingers and say, I'm going to be free and responsive now if you've been contracting. So one of the ways that people try to correct themselves when they're starting to feel like they're forward or they're contracted in the chest and the belly is that they try to lift themselves up or they try to reposition their heads, but they don't change everything at the same time. And Dr. Feldenkrais said it's necessary to differentiate. To shift that pattern, we have to differentiate.
So there's another kind of cross motivation that I want to bring up. And it's the kind of cross motivation that comes out after somebody's had an accident or surgery, something from which they've had to heal. And your brain and nervous system are brilliant at constraining a part of yourself that's been injured so it can heal. And it's part of the beauty of the nervous system. Now, your brain and nervous system are absolutely fantastic at habituating. They habituate so quickly. So your brain and nervous system form a habit around the constraint, holding this part that's been injured so it can heal. And you also form habits around the compensatory patterns that you develop while that healing process is going on. Now, the part that doesn't work so well is your brain and nervous system don't know when to stop doing that, unless you do something like Feldenkrais lessons. And this is another way that cross motivation shows up for people. They've had an accident, had an injury or surgery or something, and they formed habits around the healing process. As a result, it creates cross motivation and their ability to do the things they want to do. So there's still this motivation to constrain this part and hold it still, even though injury's all healed up. The brain and nervous system still hold it to some degree. While you're trying to do other things, it becomes a limitation, becomes problematic. Recently, for example, I worked with an older gentleman. A few years ago, he'd broken his femur, and the injury healed fine. But yet there was still some issues with hip joint and the knee. There wasn't a full integration of his leg. His nervous system was still protecting that area. And this made it difficult for standing for long periods of time, for walking, for doing the things that he wanted to do. So there's cross purposes there, cross motivation. So one motivation to protect, the other motivation, well, I want to go out and go for a walk. I want to go for a hike, and having that be compromised. So over a series of lessons, we worked with that and were able to create an integration of his leg into his torso, into his hip joint, to his pelvis, and everything started to move more freely, work more easily, and now he can do the things that he wants to do. So cross motivation like that can be pretty insidious. It can be at a very subtle level, and people may not even be aware of what history led to that kind of cross motivation, but it creates a conflict in being able to do the things you want to do in life.
I know many listeners are driving, so you won't be able to do this, but when you go home, stand up and stand in a doorway, in a door jamb, and you put your hands on the inside of the door jamb. So your arms are out to your sides and they're placed gently at a comfortable height. And then you move your chest forward and back. You'll begin to sense the movement of your chest in relationship to your shoulders and to your shoulder blades. You have to make a very small movement. And your head is going to move with your chest. So when your chest goes back, your head goes back a little bit. Your chest comes forward. You can let your head come forward. You're differentiating your shoulders, your arms, and your chest. So the muscles of your chest, they're widening when your chest comes forward. And when you go back, they're softening. So you're able to access the neuromuscular pattern through this very unusual movement of differentiating your chest to your shoulders. It only takes a few movements. And then when you stand or you sit, your spine is long, your head is floating, you're very upright, and your breathing starts to take place throughout your torso. So that's one example of something that can be done periodically throughout the day if you're in a situation where you're stationary.
So one of the things you were describing about the fear of falling is that's a sympathetic response in the nervous system, which contracts the flexors. It's a fear response, basically. And that branch of the nervous system is not really designed to be engaged for long periods of time. Mm-hmm. Ideally, when our ancestors were out in the woods and cougars stalking them or something, and they have that fear reaction, and when the threat is over, they come out of it. But in today's society, like being exposed to a pandemic, we're chronically exposed to this ongoing stress, ongoing fear, and that gets stuck in the nervous system, gets stuck in our musculature. So we ended up with the flexors contracted, and the back muscles having to work harder. And that's kind of a way, is another description of cross motivation, because you've got this protective mechanisms going on that's contracting the flexors. And then the extensors and back that are trying to hold you upright to help you move through the world are not in line with it. They're not congruent. They're just cross-motivated. And so the example you gave, this lovely example of standing in the doorway and pushing the chest forward and then back, is taking a movement going between these two ways of being. The flexors are flexing, and then they're opening, and they're letting go. And the extensors and back are engaging, and then they're letting go. So it's creating this movement going in and out, forward and back, which is building a pathway, neurological pathway out of that sympathetic response into a more balanced expression of your nervous system.
So over and over again, we rely on the teachings of Dr. Feldenkrais to inform us while we're creating lessons with people. So it may be the neck pain that the attorney is experiencing, or someone who wants to create a business and is not able to do so because they're not clear about the steps that they need to take, in a way that they're cross-motivated and going forward and back at the same time.
So sorting out those motivations, sorting out the habits that are related to each one of the motivations, like the example of somebody trying to start a business, it's something that's probably a lot of really analyzing motivation. What are your values? Do you have the skill set to do this? And then looking at what's stopping you from doing it and sorting that kind of thing out. The example with the woman you just described was more of unconscious movement habit being folded here in the front, and sorting that out at a more neurological level through a lesson combined with awareness sorts that out in that way. So there's lots of different ways we can go about sorting out these cross motivations, becoming aware of them, and working with them. Really, every Feldenkrais lesson we work with, there's some aspect of that we're working with. People come in, they've got stiffness in the shoulders. Well, why do I have stiffness in the shoulders? There's more than one pattern trying to be enacted at the same time. And so we can find those patterns in a lesson, whether it's hands-on or whether it's a guided awareness to movement lesson, and start to sort that out. And that creates freedom, ease, and congruence in action. So there's many levels that we can address through this work, through this concept of cross-motivation, from achieving in your business to just being comfortable and moving with ease in your daily life. Pretty broad scope of application to this idea.
Yeah. And we're always working with movement and neuromuscular re-education. So frequently the epiphany of, we could say, the psychological or the mental processes or the emotional processes, they surface once we have recreated the new pattern of action. We're not working like a psychotherapist would to focus on hidden motivations. We reorganize the nervous system and those processes surface and people become aware of what they're doing as they reorganize their nervous system. Sometimes I know that these terms are difficult to grasp for people. It's really necessary to do the work, to do an awareness for movement lesson, to play around with the mini processes that we present during the podcasts, and if possible, to get some hands-on lesson with a practitioner in your town to experience what we're talking about. And Dr. Feldenkrais said this so many times. To have real knowledge, you must have an experience. It has to be an educational process. And that's the primary assumption in the Feldenkrais method. It's based on learning and skill. So you have to have a situation of learning something new. And Dr. Feldenkrais gave an example in his own life. He didn't know how to swim until he was middle-aged. And he said it wasn't until he learned how to swim that he fulfilled another aspect of his self-image. He always felt inferior because he couldn't swim. And not only inferior, but fearful because he couldn't save his own life in the water. So we want to learn the skills that are necessary to give us the confidence, the neuromuscular sense of confidence and competence that's necessary to be fully human and fully functioning.
Indeed. Well said.
Thank you.
That
Likewise.
Yes. I would say that's a mono-motivated statement.
Yes. I think so. And we have the good fortune of self-examination for many, many years. So we put the work to use all the time. There are so many ways that we keep unfolding and peeling back layers and discovering how sometimes we're cross-motivated. And we have a recognition, and then it's like, oh my gosh, there's a sense of taking a deep breath and beauty. There's just the beauty of the world around us. And if in the mono-motivation, the beauty is always there. And cross-motivation, things become foggy. They become tangled up. We don't enjoy the beauty around us when we're cross-motivated. And that's so primary and fundamental to daily living. So thank you all for listening. Anything else you want to add to all that, Al?
I want to just say thanks for everybody who's been listening to our podcast, and check out our websites, donnaray.com, and my site, Achieving Excellence, where you can find lessons and information about ourselves and our classes, and find ways to explore your own cross motivations and developing mono motivations through doing Feldenkrais lessons.
Thank you, Al.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
If you'd like to follow up with a question, send an email to info@feldenkreisforlife.com. We would love to hear from you.
You can learn more about us on our websites.
You can find Al at achievingexcellence.com.
You can visit my site to join my classes and reach out to me for private lessons online or in my Longmont studio. You'll find my store, the Feldenkrais store, there as well. We can purchase books, audio products, and videos. Donna's website is donnaray.com.
And if you visit my website, you'll find that I'm offering individual sessions, group classes in the Feldenkrais method, mentoring groups, professional Feldenkrais training program information, and recorded lessons.
Thank you again so much for joining us. I look forward to you hearing us next week.
Bye now.
Bye.